Hey, welcome to another episode of Security and GRC Decoded. I'm your favorite host, Raj Krishnamurthy. And today we have, I would say, a fierceful cybersecurity leader, Jasmine Kaur, with us. Jasmine has 20 plus years in cybersecurity, managing security operations teams, GRC. She has worked for some fantastic companies like SAP, Google, and now she's at CoreWeave. Jasmine, why don't we start with what is CoreWeave? Tell us our audience about it, and what do you do there?
Hi, Raj. Thank you for inviting me here. So, CoreWeave is, as people know it, it's an AI cloud hyperscaler. Now, what that means is we are the backbone for the AI infrastructure. So, it's a purpose built, high performance cloud, which is designed very specifically for accelerating the workloads. So we are backed by very powerful companies. We are moving actively from experimentation, to the production ready workloads. So that's what CoreWeave does. CoreWeave has a number of products, right? So some of them are related to infrastructure backbone, which we call CKS. And then some are where we're adding a lot of flagship customers for inference, reinforcement learning, et cetera, et cetera. So we are increasing our product ecosystem. So that's what CoreWeave is. We are front and center, and we are actively competing with the big hyperscalers. There's a lot of traction in the market because of the way we approach security, the way we approach fundamentally the performance of our infrastructure. So we have a lot of traction in the market. The way what it means to us, right? So as a GRC practitioner, I would also like to tell you, Raj, working for AI hyperscaler, what does it mean, right? It means that the traditional GRC models will not work for us. It means that the GRC approaches that we have developed within CoreWeave have to be able to, match the pace, the scale, and the high velocity of the business. We cannot make GRC or my team as a gatekeeper. We have embedded ourselves to become more like an enabler for the business, because AI cloud or even AI world is so fast and growing and evolving every day that we need to change our fundamental thought processes, the way we approach security. So that's what CoreWeave is. That's what the GRC's impact within CoreWeave is. And for me personally, I want to help push that agenda forward by ensuring the trust is scalable. It scales along with the performance, the way the company is growing. The focus is on embedding GRC directly into infrastructure. And then we are able to make GRC a foundational capability within a AI infrastructure and not really an afterthought.
I love everything that you said. I'm trying to pick, and I think you said it beautifully. But maybe let's take a step back, because I wanted to unpack what you just said. I think what you basically said is GRC, as we traditionally know it, will not work for at a very high scale environment. Two, you said GRC, as we traditionally know it, will not work in AI or AI sort of AI centric environments, which we are all becoming AI companies of some sort.
Yes.
Three, you said that I think you're basically making a claim that GRC is not a post facto, it's not a reactive thing. It can be, I don't want to use the word shift left loosely, but your idea is that we can shift GRC left, right, ahead of and as a proactive life cycle as well. So I want to sort of unpack all those things. But before we do that, Jasmine, let's take a step back. You've been in this space for quite some time. What is your definition of R, C, and G, or whichever order you want to put it? What is risk? What is compliance? What is governance? And how have we been approaching this before, let's say, the AI era?
Yeah. So, okay, let's decouple G, R, and C. So let's put R, which is always in the middle, but it is essentially your top layer, right? R is the risks your management cares about. They could be value at risk. You could come up with any frameworks to identify how you want to kind of compound the risk definition within your organization. So for CoreWeave, the definition of risk is something that ties back to our threat model. We are in an era where AI is kind of relatively new. It's an evolving technology. So we cannot rely on the traditional or old school risk frameworks for us to materially come up with the top risks we care about. So, in my definition, the risk management is essentially something that provides you intelligence that is tied to your threat model. Your control plane becomes measurable. You have a telemetry, and from those telemetries, you're able to distill signals, thresholds, and based on those thresholds, you're able to track deviations, right? So we see G to be the R to be the first. Now your R is going to be driving or work driver for how rest of the C and the G will operate, right? So if I were to define, G is just putting some fundamentals together, some guardrails together on how you want to govern your risks for that threat model. It could be policies, it could be processes, it could be, a hybrid of both. And then you put some controls on top of that to make sure you are staying within that control plane. And for you to be able to measure the effectiveness of that control plane, you have the C. There are market standards, some regulations that drive your compliance, but they are all control centric. And those controls should always tie back to what risks you really care about. So, as a GRC practitioner, if Raj, I was to tell you, the G is how you govern your risk models. And risk is actually how you measure your telemetries around the risk intelligence and your threat model. And C, which is the compliance aspect of it, is becomes twofold, where you have to adhere to the regulations based off your industry, but also you need to get compliant with your internal risk posture, right? You need to make sure there are risk reduction goals in place for you to be able to properly do GRC within whatever business that you are supporting or protecting.
Got it. I think one of the fundamental challenges is that I've always seen is that I've always attended sessions where people talk about threat models, but I've rarely come across where we people have done end-to-end threat modeling. And I'm not saying that we are hypocritical, but what I'm saying is it's actually very, very difficult, especially given the political boundaries within an organization, the knowledge that the teams have, right, and all that stuff. So my question to you is that who is responsible for threat modeling? Is it the GRC team? Are you saying that the GRC team should take an active role in threat modeling? Or how do you sort of think about threat modeling and who's supposed to do that?
So, threat modeling is to come from within your security organization. Some sit under CISO, some sit under CSO, howsoever. The threats that your CISO or your organization cares about should be coming from there. But your GRC practitioners, whether they're, your enterprise risk manager, whatever your title is, you should be having a seat on the table to influence the policies, the processes, and the model development, right? So it cannot be done in silos. You do not want to be in a situation where you are just absorber of that threat model. You're just implementer of that threat model. Kind of defeats the purpose of you being a market enterprise risk manager. So you need to be involved, you need to be contributing and influencing the way you want your company's threat model to shape up. Because in the end, that threat model is also going to be working for something that is for risk reduction goal. Threat model by itself brings no purpose. In the end, your security engineering leaders, your GRC leaders, assurance people in this whole ecosystem are eventually all working towards one common goal, which is to make sure your environment is secure, which essentially translate to that you do not have any critical risks that are not governed or not measured, or you don't have controls around those risks. So it's like entire ecosystem is tied, but GRC practitioners cannot be left to live alone and just adopt that threat model.
Got it.
We need to be part of it.
I think that's a brilliant point. So what you're basically saying is that in your worldview, I'm sure there are people who are listening to this podcast who may disagree, because I think threat
Yes.
model has also come mean different things to different people. But what you're basically saying is that understand your threats, model your risks to sort of to solve for those threats, to address those threats, establish your control so that you can measure your risks, and compliance becomes a byproduct. That's what I'm hearing you say.
That's right. Yes. I mean,
Okay.
compliance is always a byproduct, right? Our world has become so audit driven and so compliance centric that we feel that if we've successfully been able to complete an audit, right, then we are secure. We need to flip that thought process. Audit certifications is just a validation that you have a good threat model and you're able to put good controls in place to control that threat model. So yes, I agree. Compliance is a byproduct if top-down threat modeling, mapping to the risk, etc., is done right.
And in your experience, Jasmine, what has been your conversation with the auditors? Especially the auditors are very focused on evidence, and pardon me for saying this, screenshots, right? And
Yes.
assessing that to, sampling and things like that. How have we been able to sort of have this conversation with them? Because this could mean that they have to audit your entire process of how you're doing, because they're not necessarily used to the conversation that you're typically trying to have with them, right? Have you
Yes.
faced challenges? How have you overcome those challenges?
Yes. So the auditors, or our approach to getting audited is fundamentally based on, you have a cadence, you set up some samples, then you have some population requests, and as long as you are able to provide for the controls that apply to your business and you're able to prove that you have evidence, which could be point in time snapshot, it could be real time monitored data, your auditor will bless that control to be working effectively, right? That's how typically the audit scenarios work. I have never experienced, or maybe limited experience, of an auditor who actually goes deep into your product's infrastructure or your platform, or they really want to understand the nuanced offerings of that product that you have. The point I'm trying to make here is, as a GRC practitioner, if you're able to manage the narrative of your controls, then you're able to manage your audit,
Mm.
right? But the way the world is evolving, this traditional way of managing audit will not work for us. So coming to your question about how am I shaping up and how am I having discussions with the auditors about tying our audit to a threat model, is essentially we are evolving our GRC model to be less point in time, to be less focused on a certain cadence or a machine pulling some evidences from a certain source, to be more assurance based, where we are going, we're using these mechanisms like policy as a code, control as a code, or embedding GRC part of the infrastructure itself, so that we provide the auditors with the signals that matter to a threat model, with the thresholds that a threat model wants to track, so that we not only focus on getting the audit point check mark, right? We also want to show how deeply we care about security and how deeply these controls that are not at surface level anymore, but how ingested they are within our um, products or services or processes, depending on what kind of audits we are. So we are taking them along the journey of making GRC part of the platform and not just being in an application layer where I've put a webhook, I'm able to pull evidence, and I'm able to show that control at a surface level is working. So it's a journey. We are not there yet, but this is how we are approaching it.
I see. Got it. Um, you started the conversation saying that the traditional model of GRC is not going to work for the AI world, and I want to come back to that. I think what we were discussing so far is that how would you have approached GRC, and maybe you continue to approach GRC that way.
Yeah.
But what is in what you described not applicable in the AI world? How does that change?
So this is where I'll give an example, right? So I think fundamentally everybody or most of the people understand that AI clouds operate continuously, and they also operate differently than the regular cloud, right? So your AWS, which is not an AI workload provider, will work different than a AI cloud hyperscaler, right? So if you were to audit, and like I said, I'll give an example. At CoreWeave, we were to audit our product, which is a AI cloud product. Now, for us to be able to scope that particular audit, we had AI training workloads running on the GPU backed infrastructure. So that was the infrastructure. So we had to scope this out, right? So typical audit process, we identified the identities, the compute, the capacity, the network controls, etc., right? From that whole laundry list of controls, what we needed to backtrack to be able to pull evidence. So we put that as an audit scope, right? Now, based on that scope, we reached out to the storage folks, the network people, the identity ID providers, our infrastructure providers to provide us the various evidences that we needed. Yeah. So what happened? By the time we finish this whole audit dance of collecting the evidences, right, and we finalize the scope, etc., the training job that was supposed to be running on that particular product services, right, had already finished. So by the time our audit readiness dance completed, the GPUs were already returned to the pool, the identity was already revoked, and the network paths, the storage, etc., will
Interesting.
be reconfigured and to be repurposed for some other customer or some other training model or whatever the business need for capacity was, right? So this is how fast paced my world is, right? This is how fast paced I think anybody who's working in AI native products and services, this is how quickly our world is evolving. Now, within this story, the reason I'm giving you this background is we received the artifacts, but the artifacts were kind of stale, right? Now, I was not able to provide the effectiveness of a point in time evidence. Was my system not working as expected? It was, right? The business model we are in was working as it was expecting. Nothing was broken. The platform worked as designed. It had all the required security controls. It had all the processes in place. But was I able to prove effectiveness of all these controls? No, right? And that's where the certification gets risky, right? It's hard for me to prove the effectiveness of a control. And then it requires a lot of audit discussions, GRC practice narrative building, etc., for us to really achieve that, right? So this is where we learned that the long audit cycles, the traditional GRC models of having a cadence, a sample, or population will not work for our AI infrastructure world at least. So that's fundamentally is not a people problem. It was not an execution problem, right? We have skills, we know what we have to do, we are experts. Even on the audit side, the auditors knew what they really needed, but it was actually a model problem. The way we were approaching to achieve audits was not working for us from a AI infrastructure provider point of view.
No, I think that's a brilliant way you put it, Jasmine. Let me and by model, are you just to be very clear, when you use the word model, are you talking about learning models like Anthropic, Claude, Opus models, or are you using GRC as a model? What did you mean by a
In
model?
this example, when I said model, right, I mean the GRC model, our
GRC model.
operating way, our ways to operate GRC. You can call it
100%.
approach. Yeah.
I think this is brilliantly put, and I'll tell you what you. I think you're touching on something very, very, very interesting. So if I can summarize what I heard from you, what you're saying is that I think in the traditional world we assume some level of permanency of systems of process and sort of the interprocess between them. And what you're saying is that in the new world, and I think that is true for the cloud world, but what you're saying is in AI world, it is even worse that these are extremely ephemeral. What exists today does not exist the next moment.
Exactly.
And the question is that how do you demonstrate proof and test of effectiveness, right? And how do you apply the same principles that you've applied along for so long? And that's the argument that you're making. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, and I totally agree. Like I said, right? So to your point, audits assume the system will pause long enough for to be able to sample or
Yeah.
pull an evidence, right? But the AI systems don't. And it's not only because there is a misconfiguration. It's because they are short-lived by design, and the
100%.
design reasons
100%.
could be needing for capacity, spinning up, training, inferring, turning down, etc. Right? So it's the way it is designed
Yeah.
does not equally equate to the way we can audit it.
100%. But I think what you're saying is actually in your case particularly, you are hit with a double whammy, right? On one hand, you have to operate at the speed of declarative systems. I think CoreWeave is one of maybe the largest Kubernetes shop, right? And you're also maybe one of the largest AI infrastructure provider as well, which is very interesting. So you are hit with the ephemerality of, if I can use that word, of how sort of a new platform, declarative platform like Kubernetes performs. And you're also thinking about how AI is fundamentally changing the decisions that are being made at runtime on a declarative model like Kubernetes as well. So you have to deal with both those sort of unknowns from an audit perspective, at least, right, to deal with the traditional way of auditing. And I think that's a very interesting viewpoint. Is that correct? Did I capture that correctly?
That's right. And then I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? We are working for CoreWeave, right? As GRC practitioners, we are in catch 22. So the challenges that I'm telling you with the traditional models, right? We are experiencing, we're trying to evolve out of those challenges and make them work for a AI hyperscaler. And the second part is that we need to be the brand ambassadors for AI. So anything that is being developed using an AI model, agents, your infrastructure, your products, anything that is AI native, we have to be the brand ambassadors of those. So we have to be early adopters of anything. For example,
100%.
agentic GRC. I need to be able to adopt it. But how do I adopt it is a catch-22 because I also wear a security hat.
I think agentic. I want to get into the agentic GRC, and I think that's looks like that's going to be a fascinating discussion. But I want to go back to what you just said. So you said this is not the traditional GRC. I was going to say this is not your father's GRC, but for some reason I felt that was not politically correct statement. I would say that nonetheless. We are in the new world of GRC where we'll have to consider ephemerality, which is the point you were making. Now the question is, how are you having these discussions with your auditor? What are you're already doing this, right? In some ways you are being compliant, you're doing a lot of stuff. So what is that can you describe to our audience the conversation that you're having with your auditors on how you explain to them this difference and what are you asking them to do?
Yes. So, like I said, there are maybe 2 or 3 aspects to it, right? So the first aspect is that we are trying to bring our auditors along the journey. What I mean by that is that we are trying to educate them or train them on AI, right? So in my past few audit experiences, what I have learned is that this AI cloud hyperscale world is also new to our auditors, right? So the auditors come in with the mindset you are a typical cloud provider. So the lens that they have is similar to what they would be auditing a regular cloud provider with. So that was the first thing that we tried to decouple. We started to bring them education and training around why AI cloud and how AI cloud is different than a regular cloud. What are those nuances that stand out in AI cloud that are making it challenging for us to put a control plane together, leave aside being able to prove whether it's working or not, right? So that is the first aspect, and that has been our roadshow as of last year to bring everybody along the knowledge gap that exists about a AI cloud hyperscaler. Whether it's a product or a service that is running on that product, that is, I think, important for our auditors to understand the difference between the two type of clouds now. The second is what we are doing within CoreWeave for the GRC model changes. So what we've started educating within our teams as well is we don't want GRC or governing AI cloud or product services really does not have to be a product review process, right? So we want to make sure GRC becomes part of our core product offering. It becomes part of our infrastructure itself.
What do you mean by that?
So when I say GRC as an infrastructure, I'm not just meaning just as a metaphor, right? Like it's not a cool word that I just want to throw out here. I mean something very specific. So if you understand, infrastructure is a system that, you know, something that you can depend on continuously. It's not just an application layer or it's not just a presentation layer, right? That you visit quarterly or when you're audited, right? It's not a documentation that you produce. When I say GRC is part of the infrastructure, I mean your control set, your compliance guardrails are embedded in the infrastructure itself, right? It runs all the time, it scales automatically, it works whether someone's watching or not, and your assurance is emitted and it's not really requested. You're not
Very interesting.
the evidence every
Very
time.
interesting.
Your
Can you
system is emitting it.
got it. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So I think what you're basically saying is traditionally when we think about, and I'm using the word GRC broadly here, even though there are three components, it is typically considered a back office activity. What I mean by that is, on a periodic basis, go fetch me a list of users. Let me get the list of users. Are these users on their right roles? Do they have the right privileges? And I'm evaluating that against some corpus of data, applying some rules, saying whether they are compliant or not compliant. And what you're basically saying is, and that is fine, what you're saying is that you want this to be a living and a breathing thing. So as transactions happen within a system, you want to be able to evaluate if they are compliant or not. That's what you're talking about.
That's right. Yes, through signals thresholds. So imagine, your GRC, even if it's just compliance and risk, right? It's part of a platform capability, which means that your encryption is automatically enforced. That's one part of the story, but it is automatically auditable by design. You have
Yep.
a signal and a
100%.
threshold
100%.
based on which you can track deviation. Or your identity access
And what do
management
you say
control.
to those people? They say, we've already solved that problem, have we not? Because we are pushing all these logs into SIM and we can look at them. And how is this different than traditionally log shipping into a central SIM like Splunk or Logarithm or anything like that?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and it's a very interesting discussion that we've been having internally as well, right? So understand SIM to be more like a detection and response vehicle, right? You have a lot of logs in that which are now from a telemetry perspective, designed to track anomalies and deviations for certain set against the risk and the threat model that you care about. Now, add a layer of your compliance guardrails to that distilled log logic. And then based of that, in addition to emitting your incidents, anything and everything else that you need from a deviation detection, you are also able to emit whether that particular signal is within your compliance boundaries or not.
I love what
Whether
you're
you're
saying.
deviating from a threshold of a compliance or not, and not just detecting a gap, right? You need some signals to be able to reason the
I
deviation.
love what you're saying. So what you're basically saying is that it is not just a passive mechanism of logging transactions or results or exceptions. It is an active mechanism to understand the configuration status, drifts, or anything that you would want to emit clear signals that can be acted upon as soon as possible. That's
That's right.
sort of the
Yes.
fundamental. That's
And
beautifully
then
said.
also with agentic GRC, my hope is if you add that layer on top of it, it should be able to give you reasons. It should be able to give you prioritization, stack rank remediations, So imagine you have hundreds and thousands of terabytes of logs in a SIM, but they will be useless if you're not able to make sense of them for compliance purposes and you're not able to act for remediations. You're not able to have reasons why you should care about those.
Got it. So the way we think, or at least the way that I've sort of thought about the GRC as transformation, is what I would call the GRC 1.0, right? Is primarily around how we take screenshots faster. So
Yes.
don't hate me for saying this, right? Maybe the RPAs of the world, robotic process automation world. I think that has evolved into something what I would call sort of either the CCM 2.0, GRC 2.0, whatever
Mm-hmm.
term you want to call it, which is around how do we connect and stitch across multiple systems with APIs, collect data, normalize them, standardize them, potentially even remediate. I think the third curve which you're talking about, which is very interesting, and to be honest, there are very, very few people that are talking about this, which is how do you turn this not just API interactions, which is important, but how do you turn them into agents? I want to
Yeah.
double click on that a little bit because I think you're bringing up an interesting now. What is agentic GRC? What is your definition of agentic GRC?
Okay. So my claim is agentic GRC is not CCM, right? Like you stated, there are three stages of the GRC maturity. The automation that you talked about is a machine going on a certain cadence, capturing the snapshots that you need, and is able to keep them fresh instead of a human doing it. That was stage 0 of GRC. Then we move to this middle stage, which is stage 1, which is CCM. So CCM, in my opinion, is now you have another logic that you have built, which is continuously going and hitting the same source for your evidence enrichment, monitoring it for certain, parameters, and then spitting out your deviations or drifts, very specific to a certain criteria of the framework. That's the CCM piece. I see agentic GRC to be the further advancement of both these worlds. So the automation advanced into CCM. Now it's time for CCM to advance into agentic GRC, right? And when I say agentic GRC, I mean not rule-based. It's not hard-coded, right? It's not just deterministic, but it is something that is capable to take decisions. It is a decision capable agentic GRC. That will be my definition of agentic
And let me
GRC.
ask you this question. I think this is the fundamental problem that we've all been struggling with. In fact, we have had people like Varun Prasad, who's I think he's the managing director at BDO, if I remember right. He's an Uber auditor. And we've had multiple conversations with both GRC practitioners and also auditors. And the challenge is this, right?
Mhm.
Agents and large language models fundamentally are probabilistic in nature.
Yeah.
Agents are even worse because agents compound those probabilities, right? If you have an agent producing 95% probabilistic response, you compound that with another agent, it is 95% of 95%, right? It gets worse and worse over a period of time. I mean, that's not necessarily true all the time, but I'm just making a very simplistic math here. My question is that as auditor, what is extremely difficult is that in security and compliance, we are talking about deterministic. Either it is compliant or not compliant, right?
Yeah.
How do you take this probabilistic agents into a deterministic world like compliance? How do we solve the problem?
So the ultimate agent or agentic GRC, right? I agree with the opinion from, Varun and all these people. But we need to have a moonshot. I believe in visions. I believe in having a moonshot. If I were to use an agentic GRC today, I will probably not use it because it's not ready for prime time. But we have a responsibility to make sure we build a GRC AI model that we all can rely on building a agentic GRC. We can call it a community project to build a GRC AI model, and then we become responsible to leverage that model to create the agents the way we want it, which are secure. They provide the telemetry, they provide the your what do you call the
guarantees,
visibility, and it goes beyond automation, but it's not autonomous, right? So you still need a human. We still need to be the practitioners who
beautifully said,
give the final lens on it. So let's not confuse agentic GRC to be 100% autonomous. It's, like I said, it's beyond CCM, but it's not entirely autonomous. If you make agentic GRC autonomous, right, then we are again going to that catch-22 I talked about, right? How do I govern an agent? How do I make sure the agent is doing the right thing? So we will have to see how we evolve this space.
Got it. Interesting. I hear you loud and clear, and I think this particular conversation that you brought up, I don't think it is an optional thing anyway. I think it goes back to fundamentally the case that you were building, which is number one, we are getting into a very higher degree of ephemerality, right, with our systems and processes. Two is that they are all becoming sort of dynamic decision. They are not rule based, which is a brilliant point that you made. And they are dynamically determined, right, based on actions and heuristic response, previous heuristic data, so on and so forth, right? So you have to go. It's not even an option, because given those two parameters, you can't choose to do audits on a periodic basis anymore. And those statistical or static ways of doing things cannot exist because they are antithetical to what you just talked about, right? So I think that's a brilliant way to put it. Well, the one question I want to ask you, Jasmine, is that this conversation that we are having, are we going to come out as very academic and just sort of daydreaming, uh, when in the reality most people are still struggling with continuous controls monitoring?
I think yes, in the sense, and the reason I'm smiling is if you go back few years, right, when AI was still getting built, I used to work for Google. There were a lot of traditional AI models, which were hard-coded rules based on which there was some machine learning logic built. Then over the period of time, AI has evolved and ChatGPT just changed the entire world. Now, if you talk about that era, when we were able to do whatever we were able to do as a GRC practitioners, we did not have a sight of what was happening behind in our backyard. We were, as a GRC practitioners, we were not able to keep pace with the way AI was getting built. Now we are in the middle of this world where I think it's inevitable to avoid anything with AI. So I shift from an e-commerce product to agentic shopping cart. And as a GRC practitioner, if I was doing e-commerce audit, right, 5 years ago, my methods would have worked. But now I have to audit a agentic shopping cart providing company. They have this as a product. I cannot think small, right? I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, sometimes you feel we are living in this bubble where since we are in AI, we feel we have to do this. But if you think ahead, and if you do not keep pace with the way AI is getting embedded into every product, everyone's life, and you're not able to modify your GRC models, we will be left behind. We really need to be lockstep with the way AI native products, services, schools are getting built.
I think that's a fantastic. What do you think is the current state of GRC products, and particularly, do you think GRC products should continue to focus on building dashboards and reports?
Okay, so I think this is where the controversy, I will get a little controversial, right? So I feel, and going back to my point about if we do not evolve the way GRC products are being built, right? If we still continue to build the product to building, like you said, dashboards or adding more connectors or, continuing to operate in that application layer just to add more evidences and just to automate the life of a human so that they don't have to capture evidences, I think that GRC product market is going to shrink. That model does not operate at the same pace or expectation of the AI native products.
100%. 100%.
So, if a company is able to reorient their product offerings to embed whatever they're doing part of the foundational infrastructure, I think 5 years from now, that is the company or that is a product that is going to stay.
100%. I think you're touching a very, very, very interesting point, Jasmine. And the reason I'm saying this is that what you're describing has traditionally been seen as a systems engineering problem. So I'll give you an example. Kubernetes has this very famous concept of declarative mechanisms or reconciliation mechanisms, where there is an as state and you're constantly measuring, and there is a to be state, and its entire job is to reconcile between the as state and the to be states, and it does that automatically and autonomously, right? I think the agentic world is something very similar. In fact, it makes it worse. The point I'm trying to make is that for what you are saying, GRC products have to become as systems engineering products as security is.
That's right. Yes.
Are you
and you have to make GRC more like a reliability function and not a back office audit function.
So you're almost saying that GRC and what you're doing as this audit or a compliance theater, you are basically predicting it's going to be pretty much useless.
I think so.
Okay. And I think that is a fantastic way to sort of think about this. And I think it's a very tall order for. And let me ask you a slightly different question. As an industry leader, I know that you actually you're a speaker in these circuits, in security and GRC circuits. You do a lot of that as well, and you go meet a lot of people in this. What do you do? People generally, are they with you? Is there a movement towards making this happen, or are you a lone voice in this daydreamer?
So I think I'm not a lone wolf in a sense because a few years ago, a term called GRC engineering was coined, right? I think the intention of coining that term was to eventually evolve GRC from being just a back office team to be more engineering focused team. And the logic for building this or coining this term was not just, a career making term. The logic was to make it more like a reliability function. Make sure whoever you're hiring as a GRC engineer is not solely focused on adding more connectors for you to be able to automate more evidence pulls. The fundamental was to make sure that person with three skill sets, right, understands compliance world, understands the problems of the compliance, understands security controls, and then can get plugged into security engineering and make controls as a code, right? Policy as a code started, controls as a code, start to do everything from command lines, and then have a path put together for GRC to be embedded in the platform, right? Are we there yet? No. Are we going there? Yes. So if you hear a lot of podcasts or you read about the GRC on LinkedIn or whatever your source of information is, you will see that the GRC engineering's fundamental, the reason it was started, is started to go back to why it was started. I think people started to misinterpret GRC engineering to be, oh, I can do scripting. I'm a GRC engineer, hire me, and I will be part of the GRC engineering function. So it kind of lost its value with that misinterpretation of the reason it was started. But I think it's coming back to where you
I
want
love it.
GRC
Love it.
engineering to be GRC platform.
100%.
So answering a question, not a lone warrior, a lot of people kind of agree that the work with GRC engineering that is being done right now is very small and it needs to scale to be more embedded, more control as a code, more part of platform, signal oriented, howsoever you want to shape it.
No, 100%. I 100% agree with you. Now, a slightly different question, right? Which is, what is even more difficult in your role is to convince your leadership to go put money behind this,
Yes.
right? To hire and build this assurance function, if you will. How do you have these conversations? And because GRC is seen as a sort of a sinkhole, right? I mean, you
Yes.
just do enough not to get fired, or not to get a material defect, right, from your auditor. So how do you convince your leadership team to say it's much bigger than a compliance theater or an audit theater? It has to be very proactive and it has to be an assurance function like we talked about.
Okay. So different ways of approaching it depending on who in leadership you're talking about, right? So within, like, we sit within security organizations, so our CISOs, my manager, they understand the implications of running GRC only at a surface layer, right? So it's a easier conversation to convince them to make, or maybe open some headcounts for assurance engineering or make a separate function called assurance engineering, because they understand GRC is not only about evidences, it's not only about audits, right? It's not only about adding more integration work to automate those evidences. It's primarily about embedding, making sure we are more secure. So it's an easier conversation because then you are able to tell them that the primary responsibility of an audit is also to come and tell you that whether a particular control is working the way it is working or not, right? So if you flip this question back to the leadership, right? Do you want an auditor to come and tell you about your risk posture, about your control effectiveness once a year, versus we make it part of your programs, we make it part of your platforms so that you can know it real time, you know whether that control threshold is being deviated, drifting, or is it within the compliant guardrails? So once you start having those kind of discussions, I think it's easier for you to sell your vision of assurance engineering.
Love it. And what if they say, so what? So what if we know ahead of time? So what if we are proactive?
So what if we are proactive? Then we are able to remediate them early. It's not a major, minor OFI finding question anymore. It's about making sure your infrastructure is secure. You don't want a bad press at a stage when you're actually growing really, really fast. So you have to come from that value at risk angle if the security angle becomes a so what.
Okay, got it. I think that's a brilliant advice, Jasmine. And we are approaching almost the end of the segment, and I want to ask you: there are very few women cybersecurity leaders, and I don't mean to stand out women like that, but I think it is in our best interest to see more women in leadership positions, more women in especially in cybersecurity. What is your advice to the girls or the ladies listening to the show, right? How do they become the next Jasmine Kaur? What would your advice be, right? What can they do to come up the ranks?
Sure. Yeah. So I think my first advice will be fearless, right? So you don't have to have a perfect plan. You really don't need to know everything. You really don't need to have everything on that job description on your resume for you to be able to even try that. You just need to have curiosity. You need to have willingness to follow what interests you, you know, passion projects, learning, joining conferences are incredibly underrated. The value that you get out of doing such passion projects, or the high learning, they open a lot of doors for you. So don't be scared to try something new. Believe in moonshots. Believe in your capacity and your capability to achieve those moonshots. Because when you're part of a technology, and especially within the technology, when you're responsible for security, you need to be a forward thinker. You cannot be looking back. You need to think how the technology is evolving, where can it fail, how can you protect it, and then what you need to put in place in your skill set to be able to do all of the three.
Got it. No, I think that's great advice. And if people have more questions and they want to reach you, what is the best way to get hold of you, Jasmine?
Message me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I am happy to meet you for coffee or whatever you need my help for. I'm a community builder, and I believe that it's high time that we need to start giving back to the community.
And with that, Jasmine, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Some great insights, great conversation. Thank you very much.